Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of Step into the Pivot. As you may guess, we are still in October. We're still in Breast Cancer Awareness Month. So uh, one of our times of year where we talk to amazing women who've had a breast cancer journey. And today we have Anne Tankersley. And Anne, we're so happy to have you here today. And thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to go ahead and let Evie talk a little more about Anne, but I personally am excited to hear the story of your journey with breast cancer, knowing how much that impacts so many of our listeners. So, Evie.
Yes, thank you, Teresa. Hi, Anne. So good to see you here. It's always, with mixed emotions that we say this, particularly when we're doing an episode dedicated to, raising awareness around a difficult topic. And it is so good to be here and bravely look at some of these, considerations. And I would love to share with our audience about my experience finding out about your breast cancer journey. And it was, um, we were at one of the events that we frequent. This is how we met as members of the Whippin community here in Oregon. We we got to know each other by attending the events, and I go fairly regularly. So do you. And I think it was last year. I saw you at one of the coffees, morning coffees. Lovely experience. You show up, and I get really giddy and excited to see you because I haven't seen you in a little while. So it's been a little while. And you are sporting this wonderful pixie haircut. And I give you, our like traditional like semi hug and like, hi, it's so great to be here with you. What an amazing haircut. This really becomes you. And you just tell me. You go ahead and you tell me. You tell me what happened, what's happening for you, and you just bravely presence it without missing a beat. And that really was so impactful. I think before we know it, we found ourselves in the conversation about, hey, would you come to the pivot and tell us more? So please, I invite you to do that. Tell us more.
Yeah, I uh, kind of going off of that, I for a long time didn't want to talk about it, and I didn't mention it or bring it up. And I found that the more I did, the more I made connections and realized how much how many people have been impacted by breast cancer, and it just made it almost more comfortable. It became more comfortable for me to just say it and get it out there and know that I'm not alone, and I could almost work through my experience by sharing.
It was a moment, it was quite a moment because our first guest, well, I think actually our first guest ever on the podcast show, and our first guest speaking about her breast cancer journey was Andrea Anita, who was standing right next to you. And so then
Mhm.
she she turned around and we ended up having, a conversation about the depth of it all. Very quickly, both of you were, I wouldn't call it ease, but this like willingness, you were both really
Mhm.
willing to keep the conversation going. So um would you mind telling us about how you found out? What was that
Yeah,
beginning like?
yeah. So I found out in November of 2023, and it was actually kind of 23. I decided was going to be kind of a self-care year for me. I was realizing that I wasn't doing a good job of any of that, and so I actually started doing things. So I got a new doctor. I started just eating well, doing all like the self-care things. And my doctor said, "Oh, well, you're getting ready to turn 40. You're now eligible to, your mammogram will be covered. You should go do that." And I said, "Okay." And so it was the first time I'd ever done it. And I got um, my mammogram, and they said, "Well, there was something that looks a little bit strange. So we want to do an ultrasound." I said, "Okay." Not really thinking anything of it, and so I did the ultrasound, and they said they couldn't see anything. They couldn't see what they saw in the mammogram. But just to be sure, they wanted me to do a biopsy. And again, I don't know if I was in denial or what, but it didn't really faze me. And I said, okay. I was actually more nervous about just getting a biopsy than like the results of the biopsy. Um, and anyway, so I did take some time. So I think just because I had work going on, I prioritized that. And so I think between when I got the mammogram and when I did the biopsy, it had been a few months. But I did the biopsy and it came back that I had triple negative breast cancer. And I found out in the car on a road trip up to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, for a cross country event, and found out about it on my chart thing online, and so yeah, it was pretty overwhelming.
For those of our listeners who may not be familiar, can you just quickly share what does triple negative mean in this
Mhm.
context?
Yeah, so triple negative breast cancer is when it's not hormone based. So it's not reacting to like estrogen or progesterone in my body. It's being caused by something else.
Yeah. And I wanted to add in there too, for those who know my story, and several have heard my story, mine was discovered on a routine mammogram as well. And that's always one of the messages I have during Breast Cancer Awareness Month is that is so important. That saves lives. That saved mine. That probably saved yours and so many other women,
Mm-hmm.
especially in today's world where I think the statistic is still 1 to 8 women have breast cancer at some point in their life. So, just doing that can sometimes really help that. Can you go on to talk about a little about, I think you were working, you said that you kind of put it off a little bit because you were working and, those kind of things. Can you kind of take us through what happened next, what you decided to do, how that affected, your job and what you were doing there?
Yeah, so I found out. So when I found out, I ended up what was also kind of going on for me at that time was I was trying to get promoted at work. So I was trying to become a shareholder at my accounting firm, and so really pushing on that. And so it was pretty, um, uh, which is why I sort of talked about kind of having a little bit of a delay, was that I was just really focusing on that. And uh, what was interesting is even once I found that news, I still found myself trying to do that. So um, I ended up having a port placement to help with the chemo infusions, and did that on like a Wednesday, and I was back to work on like Thursday or Friday or something, like right away, and ended up getting that promotion. So that's why I went to the event. That was like a Friday night event, feeling very uncomfortable, very tired. And then that Monday, I started chemo, and I did 20 rounds or 20 weeks of chemotherapy and immunotherapy. And that was basically through our busiest time of year for an accounting firm. And so I felt like I had to be there and engaged. It was also my first year now as a shareholder of the firm, and so I just wanted to really step up and be in that role. Um, and it was really hard to get kind of my head wrapped around, like, no, you have to switch gears, you've got to do something differently. And so it took actually quite a bit of time for me to really figure it out. I had a really good schedule. They lay it out for you very well, like, here's what you're going to do, here's what it's going to be like. um, and everything was kind of going according to plan, and so then I just kind of fit my work in where I could around it. I ended up probably working about half as much time as I normally do. So that time of year, and then just focused on uh, a lot of I walked a lot and I tried to move. I had a nurse who was very adamant about getting up even if you were tired and moving. And so I tried to do that, but it really was challenging trying to find that balance.
Yeah, and and working I think can be good, right? Because it can take your mind off some of the other things that are going on, but you also have to give your body like it's being pumped with, this chemo, right? That it needs time to do that. So, I'm happy you only worked part-time. So I think there's good and bad, and the movement I think is totally true. Well, the eating well, the moving, those kind of things. There's all kinds of studies on that now, how that really is beneficial when you're undergoing treatment like this. So, yeah.
And
Yeah.
giving myself a little grace around. I took, I
Yes.
take naps. Like I might be at my desk for a full day, but like I said, it was, I would work for a couple hours, then I would lay down or I would go for my walk or do something. And so it was just like throughout the whole day, I would get, a few hours in, but it definitely took a lot of effort.
Well, and Evie, you mentioned Andrea right early on, and I remember when we interviewed her for the podcast, she was like, "Just take the nap if you need it. Just do it." Right?
Mhm.
I remember her saying that. So
Yeah.
I love that you talked about that, and I love that you talked too about giving yourself some grace, right? Because you do need to allow your body that. So,
Yeah.
Yeah. I think this is also really good moment to take a pause and remember that we can all give each other some more grace when we notice something. Let's say we're in the work setting and it's the coworker seems tired. You don't have to ask any questions. They don't need to share anything, but consider the possibility that maybe it's bigger than just one bad night of sleep because we had a lovely movie that we were watching last night, and so we went to bed a little later. Perhaps the person is tired because they're really walking something very significant, and giving each other that, benefit of grace, not benefit of doubt,
Mhm.
but you know what I mean. So I think it's really nice to also hear you self-reflect that way and say, I did give myself as much grace as I could have. I also noticed how you talked about I worked half as much as I normally do. And having seen you in our, context here and, the professional setting in Portland, I would bet that that was still a lot. So you working half as much as you normally would. I think here we could, enter the rabbit hole of the conversations about, women feeling like they have to contribute 150% in order for that to kind of count. And as a matter of fact, like even if you scale that down to, 75, maybe even 65, 55% of what you think is, adequate, turns
Yeah.
out it's quite good enough. Do you have any thoughts on
It,
that? Just the
yeah. Yeah. What actually made, what I was thinking about was just my firm was really supportive through that too. So I felt like um, I could take more time than maybe I was comfortable giving up. I could take that time and knew that someone was there to help support me and kind of come in if needed. And I had people checking on me quite a bit to make sure that I was okay through that process. And so I really truly did actually work less uh, and felt okay about it. Like I felt like I was okay stepping away and knowing that my clients were taken care of, my teams were taken care of, um, and it was actually a really good feeling. And it was the support that I had from work was amazing.
So it does bring us back to the conversation at the very beginning about letting people know, right? So in order to get there from this first moment of like, oh, okay, I have the diagnosis and I also have this important opportunity and I want to give it my all. I want to give it my best. I do my best. My best may change depending on, chemo
Mhm.
or not, right? You did have to actually communicate and share with people about what was going on.
I did, and I at the beginning I actually did not. So I shared with a handful of people, one person in particular that I then uh, realized I was really struggling to share it early on, and so I asked him to share for me, and he was able to let the other partners in the firm, people that I worked with, know, um, so that I didn't have to take that on
yeah.
for myself,
Well,
which was a huge relief
yeah.
at the beginning.
Yeah, there's a lot going on, right? There's a lot you're trying to mentally manage, right? The disbelief that you have cancer, what the treatment's going to look like, how that's going to feel, both during it and after it, and then the thing about telling people, right, is really hard because I also kept it in for such a long time and told only who I felt really needed to know for many reasons. But it also is an emotional thing, right? It's something that you have to really think about. So you
Mhm.
go through these 20 weeks of chemo, talk about recovery a little bit, right? You were on this in 2023, you already talked about how you were kind of on this journey with your, trying to self-care. Talk a little about the recovery. What was that, because once you have the treatment, there's still more. There's still more to come.
There's still a lot more, and yeah, there's still a lot more. So, I did the chemo. I ended my chemo in early April, and I had a month break, and then I did a my surgery. And to be honest, I actually didn't feel too bad at the end of chemo. Like I was tired, but that walking really helped, and so I actually felt like not terrible. Um, and then I had the surgery, and the surgery was really hard. It was really hard on me, and I ended up not recovering very well. So I ended up having, uh, I did a double mastectomy and had, from that, I ended up developing what's called adrenal insufficiency, so where my body no longer produces cortisol. And cortisol is used in a lot of different ways, but it's basically your fight and flight response. And so um, it was making it so that all of my body was basically shutting down. And so I ended up getting admitted to the hospital where they found out about it, and now taking that. But in addition to that, I had an infection. I got COVID. I got all of these things that were not on the plan that I initially established, right? And so I think at that point, the recovery from about that was so my surgery was in May, and then until I was kind of done with all of the just one thing after another was probably about in August. And that was when I really had to uh, I kind of came to terms with the loss of control. I felt like I had things under control, and even though I couldn't really control a lot of it, I felt like I still had control. And I realized at that point that I had no control at all, and I just had to kind of do what I could, whether it was advocating for myself for just making sure I was getting the right treatment or the right care, having my family do the same, or whatever that looked like, but just knowing that I just
Yeah.
what happens next is out of your control.
Yeah, I love that you actually talk about that. I'm sure Evie, we were kind of, I saw us both like kind of react when you said that about the loss of control. And you can't, right? There's just things you can't control that you have to like do what you can do and manage what you can manage and move forward whatever that looks like, but unfortunately you can't control everything, right? Evie,
Yeah.
I know you,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, you can't. And then it becomes about, actually a piece of advice that I got from someone from my financial advisor, um, in a different context, but during the time when I was dealing with my own health situation, which, both of you are aware was happening earlier this year. So different body parts, but some similar considerations, nothing to this level of intensity. However, the piece of advice was really, really useful, which was when you then have to surrender control, what you still can keep asking is, he calls it, what's the next play? For me, the word that landed, what's then the next move? Sometimes I'll say it, what's the next loving action? The very next one. And it really is about like the very next one. Okay, so now I have COVID and this hurts and and I really don't know and I'm overwhelmed. The next move is cup of tea. and then asking, can you bring me a cup of tea? And so like that. And then I find that there is a lot of power in, this like loss of control, by then taking control over something that is really so, I get it's really at the root of that whole question of self-care, but we don't really go down there. We think, some of these bigger concepts of massage
Mhm.
and you know, um, how does this land for you, Anne, when I'm talking about all this? Like just bringing it back down to this, like in this very moment, what could help? What
Yeah.
does my system need?
Yeah, I think what I was started thinking about for me was that I like to say that I knew what was going on, but I had a lot going on, and I had my husband with me through everything. He came to every chemo treatment, every appointment. And so, when you have chemo, when you're going through chemo, you've got this like brain fog that um, just makes it hard to remember things. And you feel like you're in the moment, but then afterwards you're like, I don't remember talking about that. And so having him there with me really helped to know that like someone was there listening and making sure that I was being taken care of. And so when I had those moments where I was like I was out of control and or loss of control, didn't have like my footings. I felt like he was able to kind of ground me and make it so that we could make it to that, yeah, like you said, that next step. What's the next thing we've got to deal with? What's the next move? Whether it be I just need to lay here and I can't do anything, um, or yeah, what's the next medical decision we've got to make? Yeah.
I say it to people all the time because I feel the same way you do. And I didn't even have chemo. So, but I still had that brain fog. I think just because there's so much going on in your mind.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I was saying before. You have to have somebody there with you. I've talked to people who try to navigate it entirely on their own. And I was like, you can't do that. You have to have somebody there who has a clear head, who's working in your best interest with your doctors, right, to make these decisions because there's so many things, there's so many different types, there's so many treatment options, there's so like you have to kind of navigating all that is hard enough with a clear brain and
Right.
not having to deal with that, right?
So true.
So not to make light of it, but it totally is true. And I love that you talked about your husband being there because mine was there for me the entire time too. So but even if you don't have that, you have somebody who can be
So,
there and
some
advocate for you.
support system is
Correct.
huge. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that was Evie. Were you going to add something? I was going to say like that
Yeah.
was probably close to a year ago, right? But Evie, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was going to comment on, we had, it is wonderful. It's such a blessing to hear about wonderfully supportive partners. And I think it's been really great. We've had, several of you on the show who were in that position. And then we had this one other guest last year who is a single woman and really walked through it from this other perspective. The principle of it is the same. So you're pointing to the same principle. I have to learn to ask for help, and there's got to be, an openness to receiving the help, because that is the next move in
Mhm.
this. I guess you mean, to use the tired metaphor, like this is a marathon. When you get that diagnosis in the beginning, I've noticed with a few of my friends who got the diagnosis, then what happens, whether it's breast cancer, but also with other diagnoses, there's this tendency to be like, all right, I'm going to sprint. I'm going to sprint through this. And I think this is what, then the veterans of the experience, like you guys now, can help do. The ones who are at the beginning of the journey, is help a little bit with these like expectations of like, this is a marathon. So setting kind of like a different pace as early as you can seems to be, helpful. And
Yeah.
yet,
I kept
I know it's
asking, I
not.
was like, so how long for the folks that were already done? I was like, so how long was this an issue? Like, how long were you dealing? Like, when can I be done? Like when, and that's,
Yeah.
you never are, is what I realized, but I realized that very late in the process. I kept very much having this, like, yeah, you've just got to keep going through the process. And it's a marathon, and it's a marathon that
Yeah.
it's very long, and you never know. And you're probably always going to be running it. So,
You do. Like honestly, I'm, more than 10 years and not that I have anything, but it's still something you think about, still something you have to follow up on, still something you have to be aware of. I mean, you had it You hate to say that, and most people never get it back, but you have to just be aware of who you are in your own body, and what that looks like.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So you're like a yearish out from kind of ending that end of that. How's everything going now? How's that feeling for you? How are you feeling now?
Yeah, so I guess one of the things I didn't mention was that I also had the BRCA1 gene mutation. So I actually was basically means that I had a higher chance of developing breast cancer, as well as some other cancers. And so August was kind of the end of sort of the more, I don't want to say traumatic, but some of the more like bigger things. And then I did go through reconstruction, and so I've had a couple more surgeries earlier this year. So it's still very much um, relevant as far as where I'm at, but I had my last surgery towards the end of February. Probably need maybe one or two more. But uh, what's interesting, and I think we kind of touched on it, but is this idea of survivorship. And uh, you know, you, you hear that, and I've always kind of, you see all of that sort of survivorship and all these things out there, and I don't really it I never really knew what that meant until more recently. So I am still doing, like, I meet with my oncologist every 3 months. I get my blood checked, and every time I think, oh my gosh, is something going to show up? And if something is abnormal, you're like, is that okay? Like, what's going on? And there's always this worry that comes with it, or like that new ache in your back, or a headache or something that you think, is this something else, and so that's where I'm at right now, where I'm having a lot of these feelings around survivorship and what does that look like, and how to balance out. I can't be worried about things that I don't know, that I don't know what it is, or if it's anything. But so trying to work my way out of that worry that I'm actually like currently in.
Yeah.
um yeah.
No, and it's fair. It's what you do. Like, I still worry, but it does lessen. It's not something you now worry about every day, or, but it is, I need to listen to what my body's saying to me,
Hmm.
type thing. So
Hmm.
it never, I mean, I'd love to be able to tell you it totally goes away, but, it doesn't, but it does lessen. It does, it's not something you think about and worry about every single day, probably like you still are today.
Yeah.
Just for full disclosure and honesty with that. So
I would
Yeah.
say, having talked to you, Teresa, now for an extended period of time about the topic, and then us talking to other women about it, in the way, just about everyone brought this up. I think, sort of from my, this like humble observation standpoint, I'm starting to see this when you all bring it up, almost as one of the symptoms that also needs to be included in the conversation of what the process is going to be like. So I feel that what you're doing by sharing this, and you're really contributing to the bigger picture, like normalizing some of these experiences, and then also saying, like, this is going to come up because it's a natural response to what you're going through. So then it's both like, it sucks to feel it and for this to come up, but it's part and parcel of it. It's another ache. It's like a,
Mhm.
a response to what you're walking through. So then, just my heart goes out to you. And also, if there's anything that, our community can do for you as you're walking through the process, I really feel, like extra celebrating you, given the fact that you've raised your hand to do this, being so deep in the process right now. So we're right here with you, and,
Um,
hand on the heart, really saying that with deepest love and
yeah.
encouragement.
Yeah, no, I
So
think that's been the best, is having so much support, and in different ways, and sometimes from people you wouldn't even expect it. And I think that's been the most meaningful part of this whole journey, truly. So thank you for that.
Maybe that's a beautiful way to wrap up. We asked this question, how is this pivot a step forward? And, that doesn't mean you are at the end of the journey or that there's that's all an illusion always anyways. I mean, everything is always continuing to transform and transmute. But up until this point, and maybe even particularly with regards to that whole self-care decision that you made, how can you help us uh, essentially summarize the conversation? How has this been so far a step forward?
I think the main shift has been how, it's that work-life balance that you always try to achieve. And I feel like I've gotten to a point where um, I'm able to find that time and to find the balance and just really prioritizing. But with that, I'm also feel like I've got a perspective that I've been able to talk to folks that, I've got people that report to me at work, and I can share maybe not the same experience, but I can share like how do you balance, how do you sort of juggle things, what's really important that you need to be working through versus things that maybe you can let go or you can do later, or shift and rethink how you kind of think about your life and your priorities. And I think that's been really huge for me. And then also, just like I said, the support that I've had. I've developed some really amazing relationships out of this that I'm so incredibly grateful for. Um, and so it's been just that sort of pivot forward, of sort of continuing and leaping into those relationships and recognizing that, yes, we came from a place of we only know each other, or we've only met because of breast cancer, but that doesn't mean that has to be it, and we can keep those relationships. And so, yeah.
Beautiful conclusion. I also really appreciate the very practical piece of advice that you gave in the episode. Teresa, that part where Anne is saying, so I just want to reiterate it for our listeners. It is okay to ask somebody else if you empower them with the information to share the information on your behalf. That's not an approach that would work for everybody, but it is a really valid approach.
Mhm.
So here's, a very tangible way in which, one can move through a situation similar to yours with more grace and ease.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I just really want to say, like, you're still in the thick of this, right? You're still, and it's so amazing that you would come on and share this story with others. So, for me, I really appreciate that. It took me a long, long time to share my story. So, I really love that you shared yours, and when it's still so close to you. So, thank you so much, Anne, for sharing this. It's important for other women to hear it. So, that means so much, honestly. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This has been really wonderful, and so happy to finally meet you, Teresa, and always great to see you. So,
Yes. Awesome.
yeah.
Awesome.
And thank you to all of our listeners. Thank you for contributing your attention and your care and helping us uplift each other during this important month of breast cancer awareness.
Yes, for
And
sure. Yeah. And don't
wrap it
forget to
up,
get your
Teresa.
mammogram. Don't forget to get your mammogram if you have not. That is so important. And thank you again to all of our listeners. Thank you to Anne and Evie. And remember, if you have a pivot, step into it.